On a quiet January morning in Australia in 1970, four children begged their mother to take them to the beach. They had a great morning, playing in the sand, building sandcastles, and playing on the beach. In the early afternoon, the weather changed, and they decided to pack up and head home. While their mother packed up their belongings, the oldest son, only age 7, took his 3 younger siblings to the shower area to get the sand off of them. When his little sister, age 3, wouldn't come out of the girls' shower area, he went to get their mother. When they returned, the little girl was missing, and she has never been found. Hi, I'm Mindy. Welcome to the Missing Link channel. Each missing person and unsolved mystery is just one missing link away from being solved. Hit the subscribe button so you won't miss a video and help us find that missing link. I have to tell you, the last video I did on the treasure of Forest Fen was a nice break from what I am usually researching. It was nice to also smile through an entire video. Of course, I filmed it before I found out that Forrest had passed away. There won't be many smiles in this video, however. This story is absolutely heartbreaking. Who was this little girl? Her name was Cheryl Grimmer. I mean no disrespect by referring to her in the past tense, but I do not believe she is alive. I hope I am wrong. Cheryl was born in 1966 in England. She would have been 54 years old today. Like I stated, she was born in England, but the family had moved to Australia the year before her disappearance. Her brothers described her as a little thing, bubbly, and a happy child. Let's go back. January 12th, 1970. It was a beautiful day. Remember, the family had just moved to Australia from England. Can you imagine England in January compared to Australia? What a difference in weather. During this time of year, England is in the winter season, and Australia is in the middle of their summer season. The average temperature in England in January is 44 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to Australia, which has an average of 78 degrees Fahrenheit. The family didn't have any plans to go to the beach that day, but the kids begged their mother to go. Carol, age 26, agreed to take her 4 children to the beach, not too far from their home. Ricky, age 7, Stephen, age 5, Paul, age 4, and Cheryl, age 3, headed out for a day at the Fairy Meadows Beach in Wollongong, which is south of Sydney. The father, Vince, didn't attend because he was working. He was in the Australian Army. Carol and the 4 children arrived at the beach and laid out their belongings and enjoyed a wonderful morning together. Cheryl was wearing a royal blue one-piece swimsuit that morning. They built sandcastles, ran up and down the beach, and let the waves crash on their feet. I can just picture 4 children playing in the sand and standing at the edge of the water, watching the waves roll in. During the afternoon, about 1:30, the weather changed. The winds picked up and the family decided to leave. Wind and the beach are not a good combination. Most people around the area decided to pack up as well. Carol was packing up their belongings and asked Ricky to take the younger children ahead to the shower area and get the sand off of them. I am sure they were covered in sand after spending the morning at the beach. Then they were planning on walking home. On the way to the showers, they stopped at the drinking fountain and Cheryl got a drink. Imagine how things were in that moment. I bet the kids were so happy, loving their new location right by the beach. A beach, if anything had gone differently, they would have visited as a family on numerous occasions. I would imagine that 3-year-old Cheryl felt so safe that day, with her mother and 3 older brothers to look out for her. She had no idea what true evil she would encounter just a few minutes later. Ricky took the 3 younger children into the men's shower area and they all got cleaned off. Somehow, Cheryl ended up in the nearby women's area. Ricky stood at the doorway and the 2 younger brothers played just outside. Ricky couldn't get Cheryl to come out. He even told her that he was going to get their mother and she would be in trouble. But this didn't work either. She just kept laughing, teasing him, and smiling. Remember, Ricky was only 7 years old, and this was 1970. A boy that age during this time period would never venture into a woman's shower area. And remember, they were a military family as well, and I am sure that rules were taken very seriously and always followed. Ricky went to get his mother, who was 100 meters or approximately 328 feet away. To this day, he wishes that he would have sent one of his younger brothers or just went into the room and got Cheryl. But he went to get his mother himself and left Cheryl in the woman's shower room. His 2 little brothers followed him. When he got to his mother, she was still packing up. He explained that he couldn't get Cheryl to come out. They headed back to the shower area, but Cheryl wasn't there. They were only gone for 90 seconds. Carol kept asking the boys, "Where did you leave her?" They explained right where she was, but couldn't figure out why she wasn't there any longer. The brothers figured she had to be somewhere close by, but Carol started getting worried. The boys never guessed that someone had taken their sister. Paul describes the scene that day as a nightmare. This photo was taken after Cheryl's disappearance. You can see how young the boys truly were. When the family couldn't find Cheryl, they ended up calling the police and Cheryl's father. A large search began. It was described as the largest search in the history of South Wales. The army even got involved. Remember, Cheryl's father was in the army. This photo of Cheryl's family was taken the night of her disappearance. The following has nothing to do with Cheryl's disappearance, but I feel like I needed to bring it up. Earlier this year, in 2020, one of Cheryl's brothers was arrested. This brother, Stephen, was only 5 years old at the time of her disappearance. He is currently serving a 3-year, 2-month prison sentence. He had no prior criminal history, but pleaded guilty to the charges. His victim was only 14 years old. On more than one occasion, he forced himself on her and touched her inappropriately. He is eligible for parole in March of 2022. I have watched many videos of interviews with the brothers. Stephen is usually the quiet one. The other 2 brothers speak out more frequently. I don't believe that Stephen had anything to do with Cheryl's disappearance. He was only 5 years old, and he was with his brothers and then later his mother, and wouldn't have had an opportunity to hurt Cheryl. Plus, how would a 5-year-old hide a body that hasn't been found since 1970? I was surprised and disappointed when I found out about his arrest and plea. I don't know how he could have hurt a child when he knows that someone hurt his little sister. They say he was a heavy drinker, but that isn't an excuse. I don't want to spend too much time on this because this video is for Cheryl, but I thought it was important to mention. I wonder if the police interviewed everyone who was on the beach that day, everyone near the showers. I am sure that these witnesses would be older now. Many may have already passed away. Someone has to know something. Someone had to see the abductor that day. Did anyone see this man around the beach or around the showers that morning or afternoon? Witnesses claim to have seen a man take a little girl matching Cheryl's description and run off with her. One witness said they saw a person running towards the bushland. Another witness said they saw a man carrying a girl headed towards a parking lot at the surf club? Did they watch to see where they went? Did they get a description of the man, his age, build, hair color, hair length, and get a description of the clothing he was wearing? Who were these witnesses? Are they still alive today? Did they help the police come up with a composite sketch? If so, did it look like the person that would later confess? Could they have done a lineup? This man was described by witnesses as Caucasian, age 16 or 17, or as old as 35, but much younger looking. He was described as between 5 feet and 5 feet 2 inches tall, a medium build, brown hair, blue eyes, and a fair complexion. One witness saw a man in an orange jumpsuit lift a girl to drink at the water fountain before running off with her. Another saw her in a white car. Life changed for so many people that day. Her mother, her father, her brothers, and the entire community changed after her abduction. People had to be fearful because they didn't have an answer. They didn't know what happened, where she was, or who took her. Cheryl was never found. She just disappeared without a trace. How is that possible when so many people were around the beach that day? This family went through a lot. At one point, 3 days later, there was even a $10,000 ransom demand made. Here is the ransom letter. Honestly, the handwriting is hard to read, but it pretty much states that Cheryl is okay, but if the police do not do as this letter says, another kid will be taken. They wanted $10,000 and a complete pardon in exchange for Cheryl. They set a time up on a Saturday morning to have the drop-off of the money and then Cheryl. He said he will be quite safe because if you grab me, the young kid will die. If you let me go, the young kid will be set free a couple of days later. Unharmed, I hope. And then it ends. See you Saturday. The family had a glimmer of hope that Cheryl was still alive, that she could be brought back to her family, but no one ever collected the money. Was this just a hoax to get money? Or was the person who wrote the letter the true abductor? The case went cold. Cheryl's brothers grew up. Her parents passed away, never knowing what happened to their daughter. 46 years later, in 2016, the case was reopened. 2 new detectives were put on the case. One of the detectives was Detective Frank Sanvitali. They went through boxes and boxes of paperwork, thousands of pages of documents. They were determined to solve this little girl's disappearance, or at least find something to get them on the right trail after all of these years. They were stunned with what they found in one of the boxes. Let's go back, 1971, 18 months after Cheryl's disappearance. A 17-year-old confessed to her abduction and murder. However, nothing happened with this confession in 1971, 1972, 1973, or for 46 years. That was until the cold case unit got a hold of this confession. What follows is a description of the confession, some of it word for word. This man was 17 years old in 1971, meaning he was only 15 at the time of Cheryl's abduction. He sat with the officer and told them the following story. He saw Cheryl and her 3 brothers head to the shower area. He mentioned that they stopped at the water fountain, or the bubbler, as the Australians all referred to it. He said one of the brothers lifted the little girl up to get a drink. A little time passed, and this 15-year-old came around the building, and Cheryl was there by herself. He grabbed her from behind and put his hand over her mouth to prevent her from screaming. He then took her into the sandhills, which were not too far away. He took off his shoelaces and tied her up. He said, I put my hands around her throat and told her to shut up. To stop her screaming, I placed a handkerchief and shoelaces around her mouth. I guess I must have strangled her. She stopped breathing and stopped crying, and I thought she was dead. So I panicked and covered her up with bushes and ran for it. This monster confessed to strangling 3-year-old little Cheryl. He described the area where they had been that day. It was farmland at that time. The bushes he described had been removed and homes were built in that area. He explained the area in precise detail. He mentioned there was a tubular steel gate and a cattle ramp constructed of steel rail. He also claimed to have taken her swimsuit and towel with him after he left her body. He said that he put the towel in a drain outside an Ample service station, which was a gas station at the time. He then claimed to have burnt the swimsuit in an incinerator at the campground by a local beach. He confessed that Cheryl was dead within 1 hour after he took her. The police asked him why he abducted Cheryl. He said he had planned to sexually assault her, but his plans changed when she wouldn't stop screaming. But instead of letting her go, he killed her. What a coward. What a monster. Why didn't the police arrest him right then and there? The current detective can't even figure this out. The original officer claimed that the story couldn't be corroborated. I call BS. They never even told the family about the confession. Her parents died not knowing that this confession ever even existed. After finding the confession, the cold case detective thought, okay, I will look at this man and see if he can be eliminated as a suspect. He thought there would be a reason why the confession was put in a box for 47 years. There must be a good reason why the man was never arrested or charged in the kidnapping and murder of Cheryl Grimmer. Let's take a look at this confession. It has so many details. First, he describes Cheryl having a drink at the bubbler. Ricky, the oldest brother, says that is exactly what happened that day, that Ricky lifted Cheryl up to get a drink. It is something only a person who was there that early afternoon on January 12, 1970, could describe. The current detective explained that it was vital that he knew this detail. It was too much to be a coincidence. Ricky said this was confirmation that this man was there, waiting for an opportunity to abduct Cheryl. Second, the 17-year-old described the location where he took Cheryl. The original police officer said that his statement about the area couldn't be corroborated, but that just isn't true. The cold case detective found the family that used to own this farm. Remember, the confession stated specific details surrounding the area. The owners of the farmland said there was a fence, cattle guard, and rail that fit this exact description on their property at that time. Third, he knew that Cheryl had on a bathing suit and had a towel with her when she disappeared. He even knew the color of the swimsuit, which was blue, and the towel, which was white. The family corroborated this. Fourth, both the service station and campground incinerator were exactly where he said they would be. These are very specific details. He said he placed the towel in the drain at the gas station and the swimsuit in the incinerator at the campground. And it also answers the question of why the swimsuit and towel were never located. Because they were hidden and destroyed that very day, probably before the police even began their search that day for Cheryl. It is so sad that the family was never told about the confession back in 1971. Instead, her parents believed for the rest of their lives that there was no information about the disappearance of their sweet little girl. Her brothers believed this too, for 47 years. They were shocked and very angry when they found out the truth. One of Cheryl's brothers described the confession as disgusting, and I 100% agree with him. What made the police at the time not go after this guy? Why did they just put his confession in the file cabinet and forget about it. The original officer said that there wasn't enough evidence to corroborate the confession, and he stated that the confession didn't warrant further investigation because he couldn't substantiate the details of where he claimed to have hurt her. This confession is very disturbing. I still don't understand how the police in charge that day didn't feel the same way. A lower-ranking officer was interviewed years later after the confession was found, and he claimed that when he heard the confession, he thought that they had found the abductor and murderer. He said that the man didn't hesitate at all during the confession. But there is a hierarchy in law enforcement, and his opinion didn't matter. The highest-ranking officer didn't believe the confession. The cold case detective doesn't agree with the original officer's conclusion. This man never should have been eliminated as a suspect, especially the main suspect. The cold case detective called the man who had originally confessed, but he didn't tell him what he was calling about. When the detective asked him why he thinks he is getting this call, he said, "Is it something I did when I was younger that I regret every day?" He then asked, "Is it about the young girl at Ferry Beach?" We have no idea who this man is because his name and image cannot be released. Even though he would be approximately 65 years old today, because at the time of the alleged kidnapping and murder, he was only 15 years old. He lives in Melbourne and has grown children. The detectives brought him in for questioning. He came without an attorney. He signed the original confession, but said he was never there at the beach that day. He never explained why he confessed that day or why his confession had so many details that proved to be true. He was arrested in March of 2017 and charged with murder. He pleaded not guilty. The defense asked that the confession be thrown out, and the judge unfortunately agreed. In 2019, a judge ruled that the confession was inadmissible due to his age at the time of the confession and the fact that he had no adult representative with him, no parents, no attorney, no other adult with him during the police interview. Remember, he was 17 when he confessed. However, at that time in 1971, there weren't rules like there are today when it comes to interviewing minors. These police officers did nothing wrong. They followed the rules at that time. Of course, the police wish they could go back to 1971 and change how the interview was conducted. But they didn't know at the time how this interview would affect the outcome of this case. Things were so different back then. So in 2019, the charges were dropped and the case was dismissed. The prosecution felt that without the confession, they didn't have a case. He was set free on this legal technicality. Unfortunately, there are no grounds to appeal the decision of the judge to throw out the confession. What heartbreak for the family once again, to watch this man go free after admitting to killing your little sister, and in such a grueling and devastating way. Even though I agree that minors need an adult, parent, or attorney present while they are being interviewed, that wasn't the case back in 1971. But the real question remains, why didn't the police arrest him back in 1971? We wouldn't have this problem now if they had arrested him back in 1971. The confession wouldn't have been thrown out because that was standard practice at the time. It would have been up to a jury to decide the fate of this man. Did the police think they needed a body to charge him? And since a body was never found, they assumed that the man was lying or that they wouldn't be able to win a case without a body? There have been numerous trials and convictions without a victim's body being found. These even go back to the late 1800s. The confession probably would have been enough in 1971 to secure a conviction. Now, anything can happen when there is a jury involved, but the confession was so detailed, and if it was laid out correctly for the jury, it would be hard for them to believe him knowing certain facts was just a coincidence. For him to know some of these facts, he had to at least be there that day. The cold case detectives did not believe that the confession sounded made up. He knew so many details that we discussed before. Plus, he knew what she was wearing, where exactly she was before she was abducted, the description of the beach area, and a very detailed account of where he took her. The areas were explained in such detail. He knew more than just someone making this up for attention. We don't know much about this man who confessed, but we know that he had criminal behavior in his past as a minor, including petty theft. He was a runaway and juvenile delinquent, and he had a bad relationship with his parents. He ran away from multiple homes and detention centers. One psychiatrist described him as having a very disturbed mental state. He had low intelligence, was very immature, and not your typical teenager. In fact, in January of 1970, he had escaped from the juvenile detention home he was living in. He shouldn't have even been out that day to be able to hurt Cheryl. What kind of sick person would want to sexually assault a 3-year-old little girl? Sounds like an extremely dangerous individual to me. Had he been watching her all day, or did he just come upon her at the time when she was alone? I wonder if Cheryl left the women's shower area when her brothers left to get their mother. It was almost like she was playing a game and teasing her brother, but when he left, the fun was over. I could see a 3-year-old trying to follow her brothers after they left. Perhaps she went outside, couldn't see where they had gone, and this monster found her alone. Also, instead of letting her go, why did he decide to kill her? Or did he truly not mean to kill her, but he just went too far and didn't realize his own strength? She was only 3. She probably wouldn't have been able to identify him. Her brother explained that there are no words to describe the pain of losing a sister and the impact Cheryl's disappearance had on their entire family. Cheryl's older brother, Ricky, has taken her disappearance so hard. He was the last one in the family to see Cheryl before she was abducted. He blames himself. What an awful burden. The showers are still there today. Ricky took a reporter to the exact area and showed how he looked into the women's shower area. He said he can still see Cheryl standing there. The image of her in that room has been burnt into his mind. Ricky says that he doesn't deserve happiness, that he shouldn't have left her, standing there on her own. He said, "I was given the responsibility to look after her. I didn't do that." Hearing him say this is so heartbreaking. To this day, he wishes he would have sent one of his younger brothers or just went in and grabbed her. But he went to go get his mother himself and left Cheryl in the women's shower area. He relives that day over and over again, just wishing that something was different. Ricky felt that their father blamed the 4 of them, their mother and the 3 brothers, for losing Cheryl. But he especially blamed Ricky. Vince would drink and the accusations would start. He always asked, "Why did you leave her?" What an awful thing to say to a 7-year-old. Obviously, he had no idea what would happen after he left. And if he could go back and change it, he would in a heartbeat. But he can't, because a monster was lurking nearby. Ricky's brothers would always tell him, and they would always stand up for him and tell him it wasn't his fault, that they all shouldn't have left her that day. I don't want to judge a father who has lost a child in that way. I can't imagine the pain that Vince had gone through, knowing that he couldn't do anything to help his daughter, worrying about her every day for the rest of his life. Watching so many interviews with the brothers, especially the 60 Minutes Australia interview, was heartbreaking. 50 years later, and they are still overwhelmed with emotion. They still blame themselves. How awful. It was no one's fault but the murderer. Blame cannot be placed on a young 7-year-old boy. The link for the 60 Minutes Australia episode is in the description box below. My only warning would be to grab a box of Kleenex before you watch it, though. Cheryl was declared legally dead in 2011, 41 years after her disappearance. The brothers made a promise to their mother that they would keep fighting for Cheryl. Ricky, the oldest brother, believes their lives would have been completely different if the police would have arrested this man back in 1971. The family wouldn't have had to wonder for 50 years what happened, or wonder if she could possibly be alive. The man who confessed knew things only someone who was there that day would have known. Laws and protocols have changed over time. At that time, it wasn't required the police have an adult, parent, or attorney in the room with a 15-year-old. This man possibly got away with this crime for 50 years, and just because this much time passed, protocols and laws changed. Should this man be rewarded for getting away with the crime for so long? There is possibly a murderer walking free, and a man that murdered an innocent 3-year-old. This man gets to live every day, spend time with his family, while Cheryl suffered. Her body is still missing. She missed out on so much, and her family missed out on so much, so many wonderful memories they could have had with her. Cheryl deserves that day in court. She can't speak for herself. Someone needs to speak for her. Police and prosecution don't have anything else to tie this man to the crime once the confession was ruled inadmissible. They need new evidence, a new witness to come forward, or a body. Where did her body go? The suspect claims that he left her in the bushes on this farmland. Did he come back and move the body? Perhaps bury it? Was it moved by animals? Or was it hidden in the land the year after her murder because a subdivision full of homes were built? On the 50th anniversary earlier this year of Cheryl's disappearance in January, her family and friends got together to remember her. A memorial was unveiled at the spot where Cheryl was abducted. The plaque reads, "In memory of Cheryl Grimmer." This commemorative tribute acknowledges the events surrounding the unanswered disappearance of 3-year-old Cheryl Grimmer from Fairy Meadow Beach on the 12th of January, 1970. Young Cheryl and the Grimmer family migrated from Bristol, England in 1968 to start a new and exciting life in Australia, and chose Fairy Meadow as where they would begin the next chapter of their lives. Some 50 years on, the disappearance of the young girl from the beach reserve continues to leave an indelible mark on Wangalong's history. To this day, her loss continues to haunt her family and is unforgotten by the local community. This plaque at Fairy Meadow Beach, unveiled on the 50th anniversary of that day, serves as a reminder to all of the tragedy and demonstrates to those who are loved and lost that their memories live on. The New South Wales Police also announced a $1 million reward. The family stated, "Every day we are reminded of the tragic way she was taken from us, and we hope this reward is what is needed to bring justice for Cheryl." They also had a moment of silence to remember her. Cheryl's brothers wished their parents could have seen the plaque. Cheryl was failed multiple times. First, when she was taken. Second, when the confession was ignored by the original police officers. Third, by not telling her family about the confession and just hiding it away. Fourth, when the confession was thrown out by the judge. Ricky just wants a trial and to leave it up to a jury. The cold case detective actually ended up retiring after this case. He claims there was nothing wrong with the confession. This outcome was really hard on him. He called it the final straw and decided to retire. The police are still asking for anyone with information to call. Cheryl deserves justice. Someone out there has a clue that will help put this puzzle together or help find that missing link. They are looking for any new information, any new leads. What do you think happened to Cheryl? Here are the possible scenarios. 1. Abducted and killed by the man that confessed. 2. Abducted and killed by another person. 3. Abducted by someone who wanted a child. 4. Did Cheryl wander off and die? Perhaps go into the ocean and perish and get swept out to sea? Or 5. Some other scenario. Cheryl's brothers say they know when, who, and how, but they don't know why. They may never know why Cheryl was taken from her family that day. They believe justice will come someday. Let's hope that day comes soon. Thank you for joining me here today. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button. Also, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you'll be notified of my future videos. As always, have a wonderful day. Watch out for each other and keep looking for that missing link. Love ya, and see you in my next video.